The Chicago Spirit. Overview.
During the early 20th century, the Chicago Spirit was the largest anomalous criminal organization in the Western Hemisphere.
Based in Chicago, Illinois, the group's influence extended to most major cities in the United States, particularly New York, Boston, New Orleans, and the extra-dimensional city-state of Three Portlands. The Spirit was founded in 1895 by Chicago resident and bar owner Richard D.
Chappell, who was himself an anomalous individual. Despite years of efforts, the Foundation remained largely unsuccessful in its attempts to suppress Chappell's rise to power, due in part to its limited resources at the time as a result of an ongoing internal crisis.
In January of 1919, the Foundation officially suspended all opposition against the Chicago Spirit to ensure their cooperation in preventing the spread of SCP-2680.
Once allowed to operate unimpeded, the Spirit flourished into a nationwide syndicate and eventually became a driving force in the illegal distribution of alcohol during the Prohibition era.
Thanks to the success of its bootlegging businesses, the Chicago Spirit continued to amass power over North American markets and politics throughout the 1920s, and the Foundation was eventually forced to terminate its truce with the group in order to prevent the complete dissolution of scientific normalcy.
On July 11, 1933, Richard Chappell was finally apprehended by Foundation operatives following a raid on the Spirit's base of operations.
In the absence of its leader, the group gradually destabilized, and most of its members and assets were acquired by other organizations.
As of 1938, the Foundation officially considers the Chicago Spirit to be defunct. However, rumors of the Spirit's continued survival have persisted in subsequent decades. Various artifacts have been discovered which imply the group's involvement, though a conclusive link has yet to be proven.
Furthermore, recent evidence has revealed the emergence of a new syndicate calling itself the Chicago Spectre, which seems to operate primarily in anomalous underground communities. Investigation into this group and its connections to the original Spirit, if any, are ongoing. QI-001, Chicago Spirit.
When folks ask where I studied, I just laugh at them. I don't believe in formal education. I never spent a day in a classroom. Yet I am one of the most successful men in this city. Boys and men who could be spending their time productively are instead forced to waste years of their lives stooped over books, trying to snatch some trace of intellect for themselves. What the schoolmasters don't tell you is that genius is something you're born with. I may not know calculus, but I run the largest business of its type in the country. I may not be able to name every tribe in Africa, but I can turn a man inside out with a snap of my fingers. I can't give you a scientific explanation for how we perform the miracles we do, but then again, nobody else can either. In my business, me and the Ivy League boys are equal in everything. That is, except power. That's something I have plenty of.
Richard D. Chappell, Correspondence, 1925. Overview. QA-001, the Chicago Spirit.
Also known as
the Spirit. Years active:
1895 through 1938.
1990 through present. Known leadership: Richard Davis Chappell, 1871 through 1953. Charles Ferries Derringer,
1878 through 1950. Hogarth Mintz Cartwright,
1869 through 1929.
Julius Raleigh Magellan,
1865 through 1939.
Summary.
The Chicago Spirit was an organized crime syndicate based in Chicago, Illinois.
The group operated locally during the first 2 decades of its existence,
but later spread to other major cities in the United States as a result of the wealth generated by its bootlegging operations during America's Prohibition era. The Spirit employed numerous individuals with anomalous capabilities, created and exploited a number of anomalous artifacts for use in its business, and was owned by one Richard D.
Chappell, a Type C reality bender SCP-046 ARC.
History. In 1873, Chappell immigrated to Chicago with his parents at the age of 2. The first record of his anomalous capabilities was an incident in which a passerby witnessed Chappell, then 11 years old, anomalously exsanguinating a rival newspaper boy. The boy's body was recovered from the Chicago River the following day, but the local police did not pursue the case.
Chappell would, in later years, claim that the boy's death had been an accident. In its original incarnation, the Chicago Spirit was a legitimate business.
Founded in 1893 and located on Chicago's South Side, the Spirit operated as a typical bar, providing patrons with alcoholic beverages and occasionally offering live musical entertainment. After 2 years of making little revenue, Chappell had the idea to start a second line of business on the Chicago Spirit's second floor, a secretive trade of unnatural novelties.
During the subsequent years, Chappell sold over 600 anomalous artifacts to buyers in Chicago and outlying areas. Many of these objects are believed to have been created by Chappell himself.
This new venture quickly attracted a number of wealthy collectors and prestigious members of Chicago's elite, which in turn had the added benefit of greatly bolstering the popularity of the establishment downstairs.
Still, Chappell remained largely secretive about his anomalies,
adamantly refusing to acknowledge the anomalous side of his business in public and never utilizing his reality-bending capabilities in the company of others. As the Spirit prospered and grew, Chappell expanded his practice to include criminal activities such as extortion, planned robberies, and attacks on rivaling business owners.
By 1899, approximately 410 men were working under Chappell. It was around this time that locals began to refer to Chappell's organization as the Chicago Spirit, taken from the name of the bar that served as the group's headquarters.
Most of the Spirit's membership was comprised of common thugs and petty thieves, but the group's leadership mainly consisted of men who possessed abilities similar to those of Chappell himself. According to local tradition, Chappell routinely walked through the streets of Chicago, striking up conversations with people he encountered and employing those he found to have preternatural skills. Among these individuals were Charles Derringer, SCP-032 ARC, Garth Wheels, Cartwright SCP-039 ARC, and Julius Sorteith Magellan Uncontained, presumed neutralized.
By 1900, Chappell had firmly established himself in Chicago's criminal underworld as a charismatic and ruthless leader.
As the Spirit increased in size and scope, more anomalous objects were used in routine operations. Very few of these anomalies were contained during the group's active years, due to the Foundation's limited resources during this period. For the most part, the Chicago Spirit acted independently from other criminal organizations,
although the groups were known to occasionally interact with varying degrees of hostility.
A notable exception was the famed Chicago outfit leader Al Capone, who strictly forbade any form of interaction with the Spirit, stating that he wouldn't have anything to do with those men. This stance was presumably influenced by previous outfit leader Johnny Torrio's disastrous attempted raid on the Chicago Spirit's original building in 1919, which Capone witnessed.
The group continued to strengthen and grow throughout the 1920s, aided by the extra revenue generated by the Spirit's expanding number of speakeasies and similar establishments made possible and profitable by the ban of alcoholic beverages under the Volstead Act. Records indicate that from 1921 to 1933, the Chicago Spirit was the largest anomalous crime syndicate in the Western Hemisphere.
The Black Fort, where Chappell stored his private collection, despite the Chicago Spirit's seemingly immense power and prosperity. The Foundation's O5 Command approved a raid on Chappell's home, citing intelligence reports that claimed his anomalous capabilities had weakened. The raid proved successful. Chappell was captured and placed into containment, along with 155 SCP objects pulled from his personal collection. After the capture of their leader, the Spirit's members soon disbanded and were recruited by other syndicates.
The few who remained faithful to the Spirit and the resources they possessed were eventually acquired by Marshall, Carter, and Dark in 1938. Addendum:
a collection of private journals allegedly written by Chappell were recovered by Foundation personnel in 2008. Notably, the entries frequently mention a partner by the name of Mr. Knight, whose departure from the organization in 1933 resulted in the vulnerability that made Chappell's capture possible.
Despite the constant references to this individual, no other existing records indicate that Chappell had a close business partner, nor are there any documents that support the existence of a Mr. Knight within the group.
However, the journal entries are consistent with statements made by Chappell during post-containment interviews, in which he repeatedly expressed that he did not possess any anomalous properties, and that anomalous work was carried out by a partner of his who abruptly quit the organization, changed his name, and fled the country.
Known members: The Inside Man, 2017 through today.
thought to be the de facto leader of the group.
reportedly possesses psionic capabilities.
The Rookie,
2017 through today,
thought to be an enforcer for the group.
prime suspect in the murder of Farhan Jahanian and the robbery of the Bank of Yortek. Anomalous capabilities unknown.
Murakami Killswitch,
2017 through today,
thought to be a getaway driver for the group.
anomalous capabilities unknown. Summary: a relatively young paracrime organization. The Chicago Spectre has come into frequent conflict with the global occult coalition, primarily through its continued operations in Yortek and elsewhere.
The Chicago Spectre has 3 known members, all of whom are suspected to be anomalous in some way, but its organizational structure and operational capacity remain unknown.
History: from 1938 onwards, the Chicago Spirit ceased to exist.
Instead, small groups and individuals continue to operate at a low level throughout the rest of the 20th century. For decades, it had been rumored that Richard Chappell had hidden away a fortune worth billions of dollars, which would only be accessible to the individuals or group which best embodied the Chicago Spirit. Until the end of the 20th century, however, nobody had the resources to do so. The true new age of the Spirit began with the collapse of Prometheus Labs in 1998, when a vast amount of paratech flooded into the black market. Street-level paracrime reached an all-time high as both individuals and corporations began to engage in paracriminal activity and seek out Chappell's fortune. Many of these organizations named themselves after the Chicago Spirit, from Japan, where the Yakuza have created the Chicago Sake in a bid to reclaim their power,
to Ireland, where the Chicago Guinness traffic in substances both human and fairy-made. One of the more notable organizations of this ilk is the Chicago Spectre. Despite being composed of only 3 people, the audacity and scale of their heists have begun to garner attention from across the globe. Although the Spectre have no known interactions with the Foundation, they have come into conflict with several external groups of interest, such as the servants at the Silicon Narnia and Alex Silva University. The group has additionally come into conflict with other members of the paracrime community. The Rookie is suspected of having murdered one Farhan Jahanian, a former distributor of illegal biomedical augmentations and enhancements within Yortek.
The group's motives remain unknown, as do their operational capacity and the scale of their operations. GOC records indicate that demonics plays a heavy role in the group's operations.
It is suspected that the group may be augmenting themselves somehow to carry out their operations.
The Church of the Broken God.
Overview: shortly after the discovery and containment of SCP-882, several members of this church came forward and demanded the return of the heart of God that was broken after the creation of the universe. By restoring it to its whole state, they will also gain godhood. Since first contact, 3 other key components of the God have also been tentatively identified: SCP-217, SCP-271, and SCP-1139.
They are extremely hostile to Foundation operatives, branding them heretics, and will attempt to kill operatives and break containment of SCP items.
It is unknown how they are able to detect these items, but they have shown their ability to do so with frightening accuracy.
In addition, they have shown a remarkable ability to resist the mental effects of SCP items, notably SCP-882 and its mental lore. The Church is viewed as a threat to both the SCP Foundation and mankind. Members are to be detained by force, or eliminated by whatever means deemed necessary by Foundation agents.
Description:
the Church of the Broken God is an anomalous religious organization which worships mechanization and believes flesh and life to be inherently evil or broken. Though its origins are unknown, broken God-related artifacts have been recovered from archaeological digs dating back to the Greek classical period, and church dogma asserts its existence predates the appearance of life on Earth.
Central to their theology is that their deity has been scattered, dispersed, or otherwise rendered inert. Through the use of technology, often anomalous, church followers seek to bring together the components of the body of God, thereby allowing the divine a physical form to utilize and bringing about some sort of techno-organic apotheosis.
Several SCP objects have been attributed to this group since its discovery.
Personnel may reference items indexed under Broken God for a restricted list. The current leader of the oldest extant denomination of the Broken Church, DOI-04A, is an individual identified in records as His Holiness Robert Bomaro, builder of the Broken God, who apparently gained the title in 1946. While this sect continues its efforts to reconstruct their deity, the religion as a whole has at some time in the past century undergone a major schism. Two significant breakaway movements from the original church have entered into a major theological conflict. The Coptic Orthodox Church (GIO4B) espouses a form of literal religious iconography known as standardization, whereby adherents submit to anomalous mechanical enhancement with the stated goal of remaking themselves in the image or plan of their deity.
Due to the extent of their mechanical augmentation, members of this sect often emit audible ticking or tapping sounds, and have been referred to disparagingly as tickers by members of the other two sects. Clockwork orthodoxy deliberately adheres to technological norms of the late Industrial Revolution and regard the mass production of analog, steam and clockwork-driven machinery as a form of prayer. Orthodoxy doctrine is highly centralized and regulated by a group of unknown composition, known as the Patriarchs. This body issues detailed production orders and design documents, which form the core of the group's extremely extensive Holy Writ. Orthodox belief decries the use of electronic or digital devices, and views distributed information sharing and decentralization as tantamount to the dissolution of divine knowledge. The Church of Maxwellism (GIO4C) represents a modernized, computation and network-oriented means of worship. No central organizing church body is known to exist. However, interviews and covert surveillance has determined that all known cells are in regular contact with one another and capable of coordination. Maxwellists favor small-scale body modification through the use of advanced cybernetics and organ enhancement. Maxwellist doctrine interprets the broken god as a fragmented deity, which exists as disparate data present in the linked technology and cultural zeitgeist of the digital age. Worshippers approach the divine by embracing their unique traits and sharing their knowledge and capacity for the good of the collective church. By connecting all minds through computer networks, they believe their deity can be recompiled as the aggregate will of humanity. Due to their use of computer fan noise as a meditative aid, members are often referred to as hummers by members of the other two factions. Church of the Second Hytoth. Overview. The Church of the Second Hytoth is an occult organization of human and alien entities that adhere to the extraterrestrial Ortothan religion, aiming to aid a universal guardian deity, Rakmelusen, in combat against extraniversal threats known as Varutit. The central beliefs of the religion are that the current universe, the Second Hytoth, was preceded by a different universe, which used to exist until it was consumed by an extraniversal entity. A group of survivors fled to the newly created Second Hytoth, our reality, with 7 of them choosing to ascend to godhood to ensure the universe's safety. 6 of these gods died over time, leaving Rakmelusen as the last survivor. Operations taken by the church are performed underneath the veil, likely to avoid heavy scrutiny from normalcy organizations. The main language of the group is the Ortothan extraterrestrial language OEL, which has been anomalously kept unchanged, despite the distances between Ortothan sex group members attribute this to acts of divine intervention. Human Ortothan belief systems are known to have existed by 110 BC, corresponding to the formation of the ancient Ortothan kingdom civilization, though modern branches have only been developed in the past century. Ortothan groups separate from the church exist, all being significantly smaller in comparison and tending to have differing moral beliefs. Beyond the church, the Ortothan religion has an interstellar and intergalactic presence, having initially emerged among extraterrestrial civilizations. Numerous such Ortothan civilizations are known to exist, with their full extent not yet ascertained. Among the largest of these is the Terzan II Ortothan Coalition, a collection of Ortothan entities residing in globular cluster Terzan II at war with the hostile 12 Stars civilization. The only Ortothan civilization known to have entered the solar system is species of interest O2. It is presumed extinct. Area of operations: Earth Church of the Second Hytoth, interstellar and intergalactic regions, entire Ortothan religion. Threat level: Yellow. Overview. The Church of the Second Hytoth is an occult organization of human and alien entities that adhere to the extraterrestrial Ortothan religion, aiming to aid a universal guardian deity, Rakmelusen, in combat against extraniversal threats known as Varutit. The central beliefs of the religion are that the current universe, the Second Hytoth, was preceded by a different universe,
which used to exist until it was consumed by an extra-universal entity. A group of survivors fled to the newly created second Hytoth, our reality, with 7 of them choosing to ascend to godhood to ensure the universe's safety.
6 of these gods died over time, leaving Rakbulusan as the last survivor.
The majority of actions taken by the group are performed underneath the veil, at times resulting in minor conflicts with the Foundation or other normalcy organizations.
Group members tend to be proficient in occult practices such as thaumaturgy and limited theurgy. Caution should be taken in all interactions with them. Known leaders are Koru Archpriest Farah Antius, overall head of the church, the second messenger, an extraterrestrial group leader, and Grand Amact Priest Sean Glenn Markers, head of the Toronto Autothan Church.
Human Autothan belief systems are known to have existed by 110 BC, corresponding to the formation of the ancient Autothan Kingdom civilization. Though modern branches have only been developed in the past century, refer to terrestrial groups for further information. Autothan groups separate from the church exist, all being significantly smaller in comparison and tending to have differing moral beliefs.
Beyond the church, the Autothan religion has an interstellar and intergalactic presence, having initially emerged among extraterrestrial civilizations.
Numerous such Autothan civilizations are known to exist, with their full extent not yet ascertained. Refer to extraterrestrial groups for further information.
Mythos.
Autothan Mythos overview. According to Autothan mythology, prior to existence was the Voru, a chaotic non-existence in which minds and matter would continually emerge and be destroyed. At some point, an unknown deity created the first Hytoth, a first universe sheltered from the dangers of the Voru.
The universe existed for billions of years until an extra-universal entity, entirely unnamed in all recovered Autothan documents, consumed the universe and destroyed it. A small group of beings survived the consumption, all of whom had escaped into the Voru for safety until the deity that created the first Hytoth created a new universe in the form of the second Hytoth.
The survivors drilled into the second Hytoth, settling in the expanding space-time, and 7 leaders of the survivors grouped together, vowing to prevent the new universe from being destroyed as well. These 7 then ascended to godhood and became the Holy 7, the Koru Chooser.
The Koru Chooser were active in the early universe, spreading religious beliefs intended to raise support for themselves while fighting against entities that posed a threat to the universe.
In order to maintain divine states, the Koru Chooser required a constant source of blood, a consequence of how blood continually leaked from their new forms, which necessitated bloodletting rituals to maintain their health. However, their influence gradually decreased over time, with lowered influence decreasing the number of bloodletting rituals followers would perform. Members of the Koru Chooser progressively died, the last death being that of the Holy Sixth Yoren into 1000.
The only member of the 7 said to remain alive is the Holy Fourth, Rakbulusan.
Rakbulusan protects against extra-universal entities, Varooted, that are trying to invade the universe as a means of escaping the Vorus chaos.
A process which will in turn destabilize reality if not prevented.
How much longer Rakbulusan can continue to fight for is unknown.
Treatment of the Mythos.
Unusually for religious groups of interest, the Church of the Second Hytoth does not hold a central canon for its mythos.
Instead, the group believes that, while it knows much on its pantheon and cosmology,
it lacks full knowledge on reality, and that the Autothan mythos itself is an incomplete view of existence.
This owes to various unknowns that present in the mythos, the 2 most noteworthy ones being the near-complete loss of information on the Holy Fifth and Holy Seventh,
and contradictions between different Autothan sources. As a result, the organization aims to fully learn all aspects of the universe as a means to complete Autothan mythology. The group's branch of history employs scholars to seek out missing information and, with the aid of their warriors, obtain artifacts relevant to this cause. Central subjects of research include the Holy Fifth, the Holy Seventh, the First Hytoth, and the Earthen Autothan Kingdom. See terrestrial groups for further information. Considered less likely to be learned, yet still sought for, are the identity of the deity that created the first and second Hytoths, its motivations, and what the entity that consumed the first Hytoth was.
Chioi 3088. Further information.
Behavior and organization details. The goals of the Church of the Second Hytoth are to preserve Rakmalusan's life through bloodletting rituals, to spread the Autothan religion and morals based on the actions of Rakmalusan, to research the Autothan pantheon, the first Hytoth, and unknown aspects of the Autothan mythos,
to kill any and all Varooted. The organization is relatively small and pacifistic towards those unrelated to the Varooted, though they are active on a global scale.
Multiple churches are operated in major cities, the largest being in Toronto, Ontario, Canada, many of which exist in way accessible pocket dimensions. Secretive raids have been performed under Operation Violet Lens, but the recent inclusion of ritualistic cryptography systems in way entrances has stalled further raid attempts. Autothan entities originating from other regions of the Milky Way galaxy, the second messenger included, are prominent members of the group. Common origins of them have been the evacuation of their home star systems and attempts at interstellar proselytization.
As such, the organization holds vast amounts of knowledge on extrasolar phenomena and locations, more than the Foundation presently has.
Human group members use alien technology routinely. It is of note that, despite these connections to extrasolar life, the Church itself lacks any contact with alien Autothan groups.
Whether extrasolar Autothans are even aware of the existence of the Church of the Second Hytoth or not is a matter of continued research. Culture. Church of the Second Hytoth doctrine stems from a following in morals based on Rakmalusan's actions, commonly referred to as the organization's central tenets. Core to the tenets are the ability to think strategically, to remain curious about the world, and to display kindness and peace to those who are not enemies. The following of the tenets influences much of the actions taken by both church members and the church as a whole, causing them to avoid conflict unless no alternatives exist. In turn, they are on neutral relations with a number of groups of interest, and have a small percentage of members who are also connected to other anomalous religions. The mingling of human and extraterrestrial cultures has been recorded, albeit only in situations where sufficient similarities exist.
This has resulted in a unique cultural identity among the Church, where human members are receptive to alien concepts, even those that would normally be incomprehensible. Prominent concepts are the belief in latent non-dimensional bridges that link how entities familiar with one another perceive the world, greetings where individuals briefly turn sideways and avoid facing each other directly.
The use of cybernetic LED implants that alter skin color as means of communication, tasting colors beyond the IM spectrum, and, in small subsects, the organization of individuals into hive mind-like systems.
Multiple holidays originate in extraterrestrial practices, an example being the regrowth days, where group members isolate themselves from the outside world as much as possible to solely consume food and rest. Derived from how certain alien species would enter regrowth machines to rejuvenate after long periods of work.
These cultures are not ubiquitous through the Church, though, and it is encouraged that Autothan practices take precedence for all members. Subsects. While the Church focuses primarily on the worship of Rakmalusan and the other core user, smaller sects with differing beliefs and practices exist within it. These sects often involve aiding the group's goals via the worship of additional deities in the Autothan pantheon or ones beyond it, believing that all gods must unite in protecting the universe from the Varooted.
More rarely are sects that follow different moral practices while still adhering to the central tenets of the group, which are accepted but are viewed with disdain. Autothan groups not aligning with the Church of the Second Hytoth's tenets are ignored and excluded.
In situations where an Autothan group is acting in ways the Church views as bringing negative attention to the religion and is in conflict with their morals,
an example being ritualistic murder to supply Rakmalusan with blood, warriors will be sent to stop the group's actions.
Capabilities. Full capabilities of the Church are unknown.
Most members are proficient in at least one form of occult practice, and members commonly attempt 30 with entities said to be minor deities in the Autothan pantheon.
In combination with advanced technology brought by extraterrestrial members, the organization is believed to have high offensive capabilities, though there are no signs that this will ever be used against the Foundation or humanity as a whole.
Outside sources have claimed that the organization possesses knowledge of ritual needed to, assuming Autothan mythos is correct, summon an avatar of Rakmalusan.
Investigation into the potential for an eschatological scenario is being performed. Language.
The group speaks a combination of native languages and the Autochthon extraterrestrial language OEL, which has been anomalously preserved since an unknown point in time.
While spoken OEL varies heavily or does not exist among certain species. The logograms used in written OEL are largely consistent across all Autochthon cultures, regardless of the amount of separation between them. According to the Church, this is the result of a divine act by the Kori Chooser to maintain the unification of all Autochthon cultures in the universe.
Work on fully deciphering OEL as a means of efficient communication with extraterrestrial entities is in progress.
Extrasolar presence. Interstellar and intergalactic reaches.
The Autochthon religion exists on interstellar scales in the form of various loosely connected sects.
Research into these sects has proved to be a challenging process. Discovering the location of a sect is, in cases where it is not broadcasting powerful radiation signals, and when no outside aid exists, a matter of chance, and discovered sects can be radically different from human cultures to the point where a full understanding of them is impossible.
Limitations in existing faster-than-light engines further hinder exploration.
Despite the difficulties, the Extrasolar Activities Division has made substantial findings. Of all recorded extraterrestrial civilizations, approximately 8% are Autochthon in nature.
With these civilizations ranging in technological capabilities from near-human levels to levels surpassing all theorized anomalous technology. As is to be expected, extraterrestrial Autochthon cultures often diverge from church mindsets, some taking to violent practices as methods for aiding Rakbelusin with blood or for species lacking blood, an equivalent vital substance.
Interstellar conflicts between Autochthon civilizations with differing cultures have been observed on occasion. Little information exists on extragalactic spread. If Autochthon mythology is to be believed, then Autochthon cultures are present on massive scales, but without the ability to perform intergalactic travel, no research can be performed. Aside from small groups of extraterrestrials that have arrived on Earth in one-way trips, no extrasolar Autochthon civilizations are active in the solar system, attributed to a lack of valuable resources and noteworthy features compared to other stellar regions. The Daevites.
Overview.
The information contained within this file cannot be authenticated with 100% certainty due to the anomalous nature of content.
As with all atemporal retrocausal anomalies, a healthy skepticism is recommended when discussing or researching the information on the Daevites. If, in reviewing this file, you notice inaccuracies or discrepancies with baseline reality, please report to your on-site RISAR representative.
Maria Jones, Director, RISAR. Notice from the Foundation Records and Information Security Administration. The information contained within this file cannot be authenticated with 100% certainty due to the anomalous nature of content.
As with all atemporal retrocausal anomalies, a healthy skepticism is recommended when discussing or researching the information on the Daevites. If, in reviewing this file, you notice inaccuracies or discrepancies with baseline reality, please report to your on-site RISAR representative.
Maria Jones, Director, RISAR. This is the furthest place the War Empress, Great Yui, marched to in her conquest, but the true borders of her empire
know no ends.
Old Daevite inscription discovered near Turpan, China in 1987.
Overview. The Daevite Empire was an ancient civilization that began in south-central Siberia and eventually stretched throughout Central Asia, the Middle East, and Eastern Europe. The empire represented a stratified society structured around systemic slavery, military conquest through various anomalous means, ritualized human sacrifice, and widespread usage of thaumaturgical practices.
The history of the Daevite Empire is nebulous and awash with mystery. Archaeological evidence supports their existence beginning circa 10,000 BC, but the termination point of the civilization's control over their territory varies wildly. This unclear timeline is primarily the result of SCP-140, a book entitled A Chronicle of the Daevites, which has the anomalous effect of retroactive temporal causality. Readers of the book are compelled to add additional material using any liquid, including the reader's own blood. An instance of SCP-140, with each addition to the story contained within the Chronicle, History is retroactively changed to compensate.
Previous review of SCP-140 reflected that the Devas were eventually defeated by the Chinese general Qin Kai in the 3rd century BC.
This defeat led to the eventual genocide of all Devas and the crumbling of the empire.
But as a result of subsequent containment breaches involving SCP-140, new material has been added which describes survivors regrouping and migrating to another region of central Siberia, rebuilding their empire steadily and continuing to advance culturally and technologically.
At present, the empire is described as having finally been crushed by Genghis Khan during the early period of his conquests, although the fates of many important persons and several cities remain ambiguous.
It is important to understand that by the very nature of SCP-140, the history of the deer has changed numerous times.
What history we can read about the development of their empire must be taken in scholarly skepticism, if only because of the atemporal nature of the Devas' cultural development.
Through the research and containment of other anomalies related to the Devas, the Foundation has found numerous pieces of evidence that the cultural remains of this empire have survived into modernity.
History. Daevite sociological structure.
Although the Daevite Empire began as a loosely connected series of city-states with shared cultural practices and religion, the shift towards imperialism was evident from early in their history.
Unified. The Daevite Empire conquered, enslaved, and oppressed all other peoples it came into contact with.
Excerpt from SCP-140. The might of the Deer military was such that no equal could stand in its way, but it was not always the behemoth it would grow to be. In the early days of the Empire, after unification and the establishment of the ruling Council of Mothers,
the fledgling Devas formed armies made of grass children and wooden behemoths stolen from the children of the night to bolster their ranks.
An early tactic was to target an enemy culture's small farming communities, pillaging their livestock and taking many slaves. It was in this way that the Deer learned to starve their enemies before even approaching their battlements. It is said that rituals were performed to divine the outcome of any given battle, and if the outcome was not to a matriarch's liking, the tactics would be changed. It was in this way that Deer military strength became synonymous with not only overwhelming force, but also unpredictable asymmetrical warfare. Their culture was highly stratified, with an aristocratic ruling class appropriately called the Devas. It is unclear how factual the records included in SCP-140 are, but if the book is to be believed,
the Devas were anomalous beings set apart from their non-anomalous human citizenry and slaves.
It is also common to find reference to the claim that the Devas were a divergent species from baseline humanity. With anomalously long lifespans, this is unconfirmed and smacks of propaganda, though the possibility cannot be ruled out given all their anomalous might.
Interestingly, the Devas were strongly matriarchal, often naming their leaders as matriarchs instead of monarchs.
Power was firmly vested in female political and religious leaders.
Often, the matriarchs served both roles.
Excerpt from SCP-140. It is said that one cannot see a matriarch against her purpose, that to witness the actions of a matriarch is to fit oneself within her plans, even if said observations go unnoticed.
The Devas were not merely given the title of matriarch as a formality, but were in fact mothers to all of human civilization.
Childbirth is a painful and often bloody event, hence their actions birthed the conceptual model of society into the collective unconscious.
Sacrifice and birth, two primary cultural conceptions that we can trace back to the Deer matriarchy, for in every meaning of the word, they were our mothers.
Deer religious practices.
Detailed religious practices are hard to ascertain, but usually involved human sacrifice, smaller blood sacrifices, and even ritual cannibalism.
One consistent cultural signifier of Daevite worship we can identify is the focus on dance.
From depictions in art, sections of SCP-140 and other documents, and what testimony it is possible to gather from first-hand accounts, it is clear that Daevite ritual often involves dance.
Dancing represented living, and the Devas venerated life.
From what the historical department has been able to find, the Devas did not have even the concept of the afterlife.
Their entire religion consisted of valuing life, the material world, and its creator.
Dance was the way Devas communicated with the originator, or as they called it, the font.
This primordial figure or force is shrouded in mystery, but many have speculated this divine being was the basis for Yaldabaoth from both the NLK and Mechanite myths.
At time of writing, No single Daevite work has been found that clearly defines the nature of the font, but from interpretation of passages within SCP-140 and other archaeological finds, the font is interpreted to be an inanimate force,
a spring from which life and the material plane bubbled up from outside the universe, pushing the primordial stuff of creation through the cracks in the shell of the universe and injecting life into our existence. It is a source of life, rather than a creative figure. There are no surviving devotional objects or idols that represent the font, and none have been referred to in what information Foundation historians have been able to collect. As far as we are able to discern, the font was less a god of life and more an abstract representation of life itself.
There is no indication whether the font had agency or consciousness, and arguably this would not have mattered to the Deer. They worshipped life through the blood, the medium by which life traveled.
Excerpt from a history of a Chronicle of the Deer by Dr. Wentworth Sullivan.
They danced to show the world they were alive. They danced to demonstrate their power over others. The Deer danced to worship their gods, especially the font, and to speak directly to them. Their gods only responded to two things: sacrifice and the act of dancing. The blood was to feed their gods, and the dancing was to speak to them, for the gods were forever separated from their children by a metaphysical void they called the Nevermiant.
The act of worshipful dancing could pierce the veil, that and the ever-present shedding of blood. Excerpt from a history of a Chronicle of the Deer by Dr. Wentworth Sullivan.
How can we really ever know what was real or what has been created through anomalous manipulation of history? But surely, the most outlandish theories concerning the Daevite religion are formed around their worship of an entity called the Scarlet King.
This writer finds the concept of a matriarchal society worshipping a two-dimensional patriarchal deity implausible at best, orientalist at worst.
Revolution. Based on research into the psychic cults, the Foundation Historical Department is convinced that a widespread revolt of the slave class was successful somewhere in the 10050 BC period. This revolt, led by the semi-mythic messiah figure of Grand Carsist Hytoth, ultimately led to the shifting in power around the central city-state of Hytoth, a previously Deer regional capital city.
The Daevite Empire survived this event, despite the significant loss of territory and resources.
Additionally, given the shifting nature of Daevite history, the accuracy of these events is hard to pin down.
It is clear such an event took place, but what grander effect it had on the Daevite Empire is difficult to ascertain.
For example, no mention of the Psychic Revolt was archived in SCP-140. However, such a thing is likely to have been omitted, as SCP-140 is a work authored by those with Daevite sympathies. In fact, it is surmised that the work put into creating SCP-140's retrocausal anomalous effect was in service of changing the primary timeline such that the Daevite Empire might be preserved. Although this begs the question, would the NLK religion even exist without the Deer? If the Deer didn't exist before the revolution due to the retrocausal manipulation of history, would they then have inadvertently created the NLK culture? Practices. Thaumaturgy. Numerous pieces of Daevite ritual practices have been preserved into modernity. Several anomalies resulting from Daevite thaumaturgical practices have been contained by the Foundation, lending credence to the more outlandish claims made in SCP-140. See Articles tab.
Daevite thaumaturgy often centered around two common practices: horticulture and blood sacrifice.
Thaumaturgy was utilized to manipulate agricultural yields in various ways, including the use of anomalous trees and plant life for everyday purposes such as protection and management of bloodlines. Sacrifice. It was not only for religious purposes that the Daevas performed ritual killings.
Daevite thaumaturgical practices, like their religious practices, often involve the sacrifice of human life or blood.
For want of a better word, the Daevas practiced necromancy, the trading of life for power, or the thaumaturgical practice of fueling rituals with human lives.
It was in this manner they modified the tree golems, see SCP-3140, left by those they called the Children of the Night, and infused clay and moss to create humanoid servants highly resistant to pain and lacking motivation of their own, see SCP-5-67.
SCP-140 itself is often powered by human blood, although any liquid that one could write with will serve. However, the creation of SCP-140's retrocausal anomalous effect is certainly the product of human sacrifice.
Excerpt from SCP-140. Hence, it was in the year 7033 that the Diamatriarch ruling over the grand capital of Adytum performed a great working.
500 war slaves were sacrificed in obeisance to the font, and after 3 nights, the moon turned the color of blood, and the matriarch knew her quarry had been found. In the mountains of Clapotum, the celestial spawn hid its tower, built to form a new army to challenge the righteous might of the matriarch. And lo, did she send an awesome force to that citadel and defeat the fledgling army, though her quarry did escape with its child. Moreover, powerful ontokinetic anomalies discovered by Foundation personnel and tied to Dia practices have been shown to work on the basis of human sacrifice. See SCP-5-6-6.
Recently acquired documents and artifacts have provided necessary context to hypothesized Daevite practices. Unlike a number of non-anomalous cultures, the ancient Daevites appear to have believed in a transmigration of essences without the concept of the soul or an afterlife.
The body was entirely secondary to the blood, as the blood was the medium through which all life flowed. Essence was transposed from life to life, incarnated and fungible, but eternal singular identity was rejected. A virtuous existence, their primary virtue being one of faithful servitude to the font and to the physical world, was to be rewarded in this life by way of luxury and power.
Their thaumaturgy reflects this, with spells and other thaumic workings often conceived as living things in themselves. Retrocausal ontokinetic anomalies.
Of note are the retrocausal effects of Daevite thaumaturgical rituals. The Foundation has discovered at least 2 anomalies created with the purpose of retrieving victory from defeat by changing the outcomes of events.
Both SCP-14 and SCP-5711 represent such rituals.
Philosophically, the Dia had little respect for the concept of time. They viewed events as malleable in everyday life, at least for the Divas themselves. Somehow, over their multiple millennia spanning history, the ruling classes of the Empire were able to harness thaumaturgical rituals to rewrite events and retroactively change the results. Whatever origins the Dia may have had before, they have been almost certainly retrocausally erased due to their meddling with temporal thaumaturgy.
This also at least partially explains the variable universes discovered where the Dia either continued to exist or existed in a fashion completely differently than in baseline reality. Excerpt from A History of a Chronicle of the Dia by Dr. Wentworth Sullivan. Amongst those scholars in the know about anomalous history, there have been some outlandish theories bandied about concerning the origin of the Divas. I always like to point out that there is often not much we know about origins of any ancient civilization, besides what can be told from the archaeological record. But if we put that aside for a moment, a more terrifying reality comes into focus.
What if the Dia had used their atemporal retroactive anomalous rituals so often and so early into their history that they have completely rewritten their origins?
Or more fantastically, what if the Dia never existed in this reality at all before a chronicle of the Dia was first published and distributed?
What if the anomalous factors at play in that tome are the origins of the Dia?
Or what if the tome is a vehicle by which the Dia have invaded this reality, if only in retroactively rewriting history?
Additionally, Foundation researchers have derived at least one beneficial anomaly from Daevite thaumaturgy based on retrocausal manipulation through cognitohazardous images.
See SCP-2140.
Modern-day influences. Despite the apparent demise of the Daevite Empire, their influence has had a marked impact on modern-day cultures and practices. The most obvious example of this influence is the ascetic Order of the Immortal Dia, a cult led by a mysterious figure classified as SCP-14A, which is responsible for the production and distribution of SCP-14 instances. The Order has operated from the late 18th century to the present. SCP-14A has been noted to appear within the content of SCP-140, but it is unclear whether this individual is a descendant of the Dia, a survivor of the Empire, or merely a modern devotee. Long before the Foundation began operating within the United States, the Order had influenced certain echelons of society in the US and in Europe. During the rise of occultism in the 19th century, the Order performed as ANCs,
promised the elevation of the spirit, and preached about the ascendancy of the body toward the divine. Before the Order's retreat out of the public eye, over 200 missing persons reports were filed in connection to their operations in New York City, London, and Paris, yet no charges were ever filed.
Investigations by Foundation researchers have found little direct evidence of wrongdoing or anomalous practices. The Order continues to operate a small center in Paris that is under constant surveillance.
SCP-140 is the subject of an ongoing manhunt.
Agricultural. Other cultural influences have survived through anomalous communities passing down Daevic agricultural techniques, such as the thaumaturgical modification of honeybees to produce arts and crafts,
Shape hives in the architectural style of ancient Daevic building techniques, and reproduce scenes from Daevite historical annals. These bees have also been known to modify plant life to make them more susceptible to Daevic modifications for specific anomalous purposes, and encourage faster, more consistent growth, regardless of temperature and elevation.
The Daevas had a cultural focus on anomalous plant life, including developing peach trees that grew human heads to memorialize a favorite slave or matriarch, trees that were animate guardians with organic weaponry, and trees that would display the memories of an individual who performed a blood sacrifice.
The last was also capable of predicting potential mates and identifying likely genetic defects. It was in this way that the ruling Daevas maintained their bloodlines.
Lesser Key of Solomon.
The Ars Goetia is a well-known grimoire written in the 1600s by an unknown author and collected into one tome with 4 others, entitled Lemmigeton Clavicular Salomonis. The Ars Goetia's primary focus is on demonology and the classification of 72 demons.
The tome denotes sigils for each of the demons named. Each sigil signifies the seal of the named demon.
Careful examination of the sigils revealed the script has been adapted to form the shapes. Was this done consciously, or did the authors of the grimoire merely adapt occult symbols that had drifted down the centuries?
Review of thaumaturgical histories from the Wanderer's Library have revealed Daevite influences, and even some very rare translations of their rites.
This lends credence to the theory that a significant portion of modern thaumaturgical works is based at least in part on Dae practices.
Modern activities attributable to Dae agents. In the 1990s, Site 91 in Yorkshire, England was a centre for investigations into thaumaturgical and xenobiological threats to normalcy.
During the investigation, a surviving matriarch was discovered to be behind a Russian conglomerate's expansion.
In the process of attempting to locate the matriarch and other anomalous forces she was in arms against, the staff of Site 91 discovered an abandoned Dae stronghold in eastern Mongolia and the process by which the Daevas created their grass children.
As such, these reports concerning the investigation offer our greatest insight into the potential threat of an active Daevite force on the Foundation's attempts to maintain normalcy. The Dae were effectively the first civilization, even earlier than Ur or Sumer, and the influence of their activities on modern cultures cannot be discounted.
But it is the Daevas' inability to completely fade into history that makes them relevant for Foundation research.
Whether retrocausal, ontogenetic, or the anomalous manipulation of plant life, the Dae are a consistent aspect of the anomalous world.
They touched every major anomalous group that dates to antiquity, and the reverberations of their actions continue to surface. Personnel are to remain vigilant for any sign of Daevite anomalies,
as we do not know if the dawn promised by SCP-140's cult is an aspirational goal or precognitive warning.
Footnotes.
1. Despite Sullivan's doubts, Foundation researchers have discovered at least one alternative universe where this in fact was the case. 2. Theorized to translate to modern dating conventions circa 425 BCE. 3.
The Urals. 4. Last noticeably active in 1939.
5. Designated Project Hecatonchyrs.
6.
Another variation where the Daevas worshipped a Scarlet King, it is important to note.
Dae College.
Overview.
Dae College is a coeducational liberal arts and occult sciences college in the heart of scenic Three Portlands, an extra-dimensional city-state located adjacent to the American Northwest and Southern England, with a curriculum that focuses on the marriage of mundane and occult disciplines and a well-regarded art program. Dae is often seen as the liberal arts counterpart to its GOC-sponsored rival across town, ICSUT Portlands. A number of prominent figures in the anomalous world are Dae alumni, including Vincent Anderson, the CEO of Anderson Robotics, and Esther Lesbian Jenga Kogan.
one of the few founders of Gamers Against Weed.
As the Foundation's operations in 3 Portlands are heavily restricted by a number of agreements with the FBI's Unusual Incidents Unit, Deer College itself is relatively free of Foundation intervention. However, all Deer alumni are automatically marked as persons of interest and may be subject to increased Foundation scrutiny. Dr. Wondertainment.
Overview.
Dr. Wondertainment, whether an individual or collective entity, is capable of producing anomalous artifacts and entities which thematically resemble children's toys. The nature of these objects and devices varies, although all were clearly intended to be utilized by children.
In addition, Dr. Wondertainment is responsible for the creation of the Little Misters, anomalous humanoids altered for collectability.
Dr. Wondertainment is known to have targeted Foundation personnel in the past, and their feelings towards the Foundation appear to be ambiguous. See the entry for Isabel Wondertainment on the personnel dossier for more information. Links to the factory have been speculated but are unconfirmed. What is Dr. Wondertainment?
Wondertainment is a manufacturer of anomalous magical children's toys. Wondertainment finds its roots very early in the site's history, all the way back to Super Paper in Series I.
Since then, it has evolved to fit some very key concepts.
Wondertainment is a capitalist construct. Wondertainment makes children's toys. Wondertainment is childish and playful. Whether or not the previous bullet point is a fad is up for debate.
Dr. Wondertainment may be a company. It may be an individual. It may be an individual that runs a company.
Most important, however, is that Dr. Wondertainment is magical, and they make toys.
Whether they be toys that aren't exactly safe or toys that are beyond anything a kid could ever imagine or want. The very basics of Wondertainment is that they make toys.
Interpretations range from being warm-hearted and kind to either straight-up terrible or more than a little misguided.
However their intentions grasp on the world is perceived, they are inarguably tied to children and childlike behaviors.
So, how does one write Dr. Wondertainment? Well, trust me, I know this is going to sound stupid, but have fun with it.
Yes, you should have fun writing anything, because then what's the point?
Specifically with Wondertainment though, I believe that the primary way to write it well is to not worry about logic.
If you're going to write a Wondertainment toy, it has to be fucking fun.
Make your reader want that toy.
If you're going to write a tale, make it over the top.
Put a shit ton of corgis in it.
Make there be a dictator that rules over candy. Even when it gets dark, hide it behind a veneer of fun.
When whimsy goes wrong, it's still whimsy.
And Dr. Wondertainment is 100% whimsy, to its core. That's what Wondertainment is all about. If you're an aspiring Dr. Wondertainment writer, your main job is to go nuts, kid. The Factory.
Overview. Little is known about the factory.
Excursions into facilities purported to be operated by them have yielded limited results, and no concrete conclusions have been reached except that they seem capable of manufacturing anomalous artifacts and that they use mass production techniques to do so.
The factory is a poorly understood entity or group of entities of indeterminate origin stationed primarily in the Midwestern US and several countries with poor labor laws. It's reported to have been founded in 1835 by UT 0561 Venice Green, whose current location is unknown. Its management is comprised of ostensibly sapient entities which have yet to be satisfactorily described or photographed. Structure. No definitive information is available regarding their internal organization at this time.
It is believed that the factory operates loosely corresponding with similar non-anomalous corporations.
Resources. The factory appears to be self-funded through the sales of various mass-produced anomalies. Standing orders. Engage as soon as possible. Operatives of the factory are to be considered KTES. Response level 3 by default, 4 if actively aggressive.